Welcome back to Radio Entrepreneurs. I'm here in the Money Matters Radio Network studios with the fabulous Mark Z. Mark, we have a guest we've been trying to get on this show because he's got a lot to offer us for a long time.
Correct. I've been working on Ed, and finally Ed Hershfield, who's a senior partner at Rudnick and has a commercial real estate specialty, is one of the best in the business. And Ed, great to have you on the show today.
Thanks very much, guys. It's a pleasure to finally be able to be here with you.
Ed, why don't you first tell us, what your practice is, since Mark's been raving about you.
Sure, happy to do that, Jeffrey. Brown Rudnick, I've been at Brown Rudnick about 28 years, which is a long time in the legal field. We are a few hundred lawyers in 5 offices in the United States, plus London and Dublin, Boston, New York, D.C., Providence, and Hartford. I spend most of my time in Boston and about 4 days a week in New York in the commercial real estate field. Largely acquisition, development, permitting, also debt restructuring, acquisition of distressed properties, and pretty much the gamut of commercial real estate.
Wow.
Ed has got a specialty that can roll with the times, obviously during good development time and obviously strategy for tough times.
That's the plan, and hopefully it works out sometimes, Mark, and sometimes it doesn't work out quite the way you anticipate, but you're right, it's designed to be counter-cyclical, so that in good times you're doing a lot of development work, acquisition, representing funds and individuals and a lot of small entrepreneurs that, in the Boston area who are looking to build or get into or build their real estate holdings. And then in downtimes, there's a lot of opportunities because of distressed properties and distressed assets where you can work with people to take advantage of those opportunities.
Well, first of all, when we talk about working with people to take advantage in these times, you want to talk about distressed properties and commercial opportunities as you see them?
Sure. I think I've been through 3 down cycles now in my career, and this one, I think if you talk to most people, is very different. And in the other 2 down cycles, there were properties that had problems, and the market cleared itself, and it happened relatively quickly. In this down cycle, it's a very different situation because the government did not want commercial real estate to have the negative effect on the economy that it could have had. We're still dealing with residential real estate. Trying to deal with all those distressed properties has been troubling enough. If you took all of the problem commercial real estate that is being held by banks, as somebody said to me, if you required the commercial banks to mark to market, which means to set the actual values of their real estate holdings as opposed to what they're carrying it on their books for, the banks would basically be insolvent. So the government has not.
Scary.
It's very scary.
Yeah.
So the government consistently has allowed the banks to not mark the properties to market, to carry the real estate on their books. And so the banks have little incentive to dispose of the real estate. So for that reason, a lot of properties that have significant problems are continued to be carried by there's not a lot of commercial foreclosures. There's been a lot of residential foreclosures, and we've all read about those stories in the papers. But in terms of commercial foreclosures, they've been fewer and far between, largely because unless a bank is unhappy with the sponsorship, I mean unhappy with the borrower, or they feel that the borrower has taken advantage of the bank or isn't doing what the borrower said they would do, basically, what is the bank going to do? I mean, they're better off letting the person, if they think that they know what they're doing, continue to own the property. So there have not nearly, Mark, to go to your question, been as many opportunities as there have been in the past, where the market provided through foreclosure.
So it's a little frozen, you're
right.
saying.
It's still pretty frozen, but people have to be more opportunistic. And if you are opportunistic and can work with the right people, you can find plays that are out there. A lot of the properties were part of structured finance vehicles, commercially backed securities, mortgage-backed securities. So for that reason, it's confusing and it's complicated. So for a lot of people, when something's confusing and complicated, they kind of throw up their hands and say, it's not worth my time and trouble. But there are ways, even in properties that are in structured finance transactions, that you can get involved in those transactions by buying tranches of the debt, because typically these deals were structured with many, many different levels of debt, and depending upon where you buy into the property or buy the debt, and in many cases you're buying debt that may not have a lot of value, you can, through different aggressive tactics, sometimes putting entities into bankruptcy, which is not necessarily a scary thing. That we have a lot of bankruptcy folks that in our shop that we work with in the real estate group regularly, to take properties, put them into bankruptcy, and then restructure the financing that exists, and the people, and then some of the creditors end up better off than they were before. Some of the creditors, they don't end up, I would say, worse off, but they end up, instead of holding a fictitious mortgage worth what they thought was X, it's now worth Y, but the reality was that was all it was worth to begin with.
You know what's also interesting, speaking of depressed property and looking at opportunities, Massachusetts is getting involved heavily now in the casino space, as we have the law and they've given certain territories over, and you're seeing what's going in Boston, what's going in Springfield, and I understand you've done some representation in that area.
Yeah, I should say, just by way of disclosure, we represent MGM. And MGM is one of the players looking for one of the licenses. And I'll give you a little bit of the background, but I think your question is very timely, Mark, given what's currently going on and what you're going to see and what you and your listeners can expect to see in the next several months, or really in the casino area. As you know, the legislation was passed, and a lot of people have been very critical of what's been happening because there's been delays, and if you talk to people, they would say, well, there hasn't been any progress, we don't see anything really occurring.
A lot of politics.
Well, there has been politics, clearly, and it took them a while to get the commissioners all appointed and to get everything on the right track, but I think the state also realizes we have one opportunity to get this right, and if you get it wrong, it's not going to be easy to fix.
Right.
If you look at, it's a lovely facility. I've been there, Twin Rivers in Rhode Island, but they've had to try and go back in a few times to try and remedy and to make that a viable gaming location. So the idea here was that you were going to divide up the state into 3 areas. You were going to have 3 resort-style casinos, up to 3. And people keep saying, well, there'll be 3. There may not be 3. The commission may decide 3's too many. They can decide 3's the great number and we're going to do 3, but they don't have to do 3. And plus 1 slot parlor. And the idea being that the slot parlor can be located anywhere, but the 3 casinos, one will be in relatively the eastern part of the state, Suffolk County, Essex, Middlesex, Norfolk, that area. And one will be in the western part of the state, and one will be in the southeastern part. Southeastern part has been the subject of a great deal of some controversy, I should say, because the legislation also provided that a Native American tribe had the first dibs, if you will, on that license in the southeastern region. And that's currently undergoing a lawsuit, and they're currently, the state entered into an agreement with the Wampanoags, the Mashpee Wampanoags, but now the Wampanoags, the federal government didn't like the deal that the state and the Wampanoags made, so they have to do a new deal. There's also a question as to whether the federal government recognizes the Mashpee Wampanoags as a tribe. And so there's some bill in Congress and the Senate that's kind of hung up right now. So it'll be interesting to see how the southeastern one plays out. But what's going to happen now, and the next operative date is quickly approaching us, is January 15th, 2013. What has to happen by that date is anybody that's applying for a license that's the deadline for application. And if you make an application, you have to put up a $400,000 non-refundable deposit. So that'll be the first test of really who is doing more than sticking their toe in, but who is really kind of jumping in. And that part of the application really is a lot of vetting of the company and of the individuals. They, like most states, and we've been involved in some other states as well, they really do commissions, the gaming commissions do a lot of background checking to make sure that the people that are involved in these enterprises are really above board. Then after January 15th, the next date will probably be around mid-July. And what will happen at that time is they will then determine who's qualified based on who submitted in January, and they will send out a second part of the application. That'll be much more specific about what do you want to do, where do you want to do it, and what is your idea for the kind of resort casino or slot parlor that you're doing. And there are several requirements with that. There is a $500 million required minimum investment if you're going to do a resort casino. If you're doing the slot parlor, I think it's a $125 million minimum investment. So you got significant dollars. There are licensing fees. The licensing fee for the casinos is $85 million a year. The slot parlor is a lower number, but again, not insignificant if you get the license. And in order to make that application, so that they're going to send out those applications in June. when you send it back in December is probably the operative deadline. You will have had to not only identify where you want to go and that you've got the wherewithal to make the investment, you actually will have had to enter into an agreement with the host community. So if you're in Boston, Suffolk Downs, you will have needed to have your agreement made with the city and have had that agreement approved by the appropriate body in the city. In the city, it's a ward. If you're dealing with a town, then it's the entire town. So that's why when Steve Wynn was looking at Foxborough, he pulled back because he would have needed to have the entire town vote to approve it, even if he got the Board of Selectmen in Foxborough to say that they wanted to do it. So between June and December, the applicants will need to cut their deal with the towns, have a referendum passed, and submit that application in December. And then the expectation is, once those applications come in, around the end of next February 2014, so a little bit over a year from now, but that'll happen pretty quickly, the commission will issue its decision as to where it's granting licenses.
A lot of steps. I mean, from
Intriguing.
what I've read, it is intriguing. It's about a process, but it's interesting in how you see people pulling out, and then you see other towns like what is it in
Everett now is in play.
Everett's in play. The new mayor of Northampton, Holyoke or something.
Right, who's I think he's 23 or 25 years old.
And he campaigned against it.
But now he's changed his mind.
Right.
Because he wants the cash.
Right.
Well, it's a tremendous amount of tax revenue. It's also a tremendous amount of permanent jobs, and a lot of construction jobs to boot, which aren't permanent jobs, but are really good quality construction
Well,
jobs.
there are, I did hear a study once that said that the casinos in other states have been good for the casinos, but not good for the surrounding industries, because people go into the casinos, spend a lot of money, but then go right back where they came from.
Well, I know one thing here, Jeffrey, that's interesting. When they passed the legislation, and I don't have the numbers at my fingertips, but they tried to deal with some of that in that they wanted to make sure that the casinos were fitting a certain slot that wasn't otherwise filled by smaller businesses.
Right.
So that the venues, the size of the halls in the venues have to be above a certain number and below a certain number so that they won't compete with hopefully won't compete with existing establishments that are already trying to get business.
Well, I can see why Mark wanted to have you on the show, Ed. Clearly, once we brought up the casinos and real estate, you hit your zone, you could see it, and you really know what you're talking about. It's an intriguing subject. You kept both of us quiet through the whole thing. If somebody wants to know more about this topic, they can find you on YouTube, and you'll find us also on our website. How would they be able to contact you?
Oh, absolutely. Hopefully it's easy. You can get a hold of me at Hershfield, that's EHERSH Field at brownrudnick.com, or my phone number is 617-856-8545, or our website is www.brownrudnick.com.
Mark, anything you want to say?
Ed, thanks for appearing. We're very educational.
Thank you for having me.
We've been trying to get him on the show for a couple of years. We also know you and your family by reputation. We want to thank you for all your community support also as well.
We're happy to be able to do it.
It was
Great.
worth the wait.
Worth the wait. I want to remind everybody this is Radio Entrepreneurs. I'm with Mark Z and Ed Hershfield from Brown Rudnick. We'll be right back after this break.